All right, welcome back to video 2. So glad you're still with me. You are part of a very small segment of society who actually follows through and shows up. Oh, and by the way, if you happen to get sent this video by a friend of yours, or if you were just looking for the end of the internet and managed to stumble across it, take a minute, go back and watch video 1 first, because it's going to make what we discuss now so much easier to understand. Speaking of video 1, in that training, we discussed how business is changing the way that we market and sell what we do, and what we need to change too. And at the end of that video, I gave you some simple steps that you can use to your marketing to get recognized and have your voice heard over all of the other voices vying for your audience's attention. Today, I want to share with you a formula that I have used for years to quickly build trust and goodwill with my followers, while at the same time making more money with less effort. But you may be wondering, what gives me the right to teach this stuff to you? How do you know that I'm on the level and that I actually know what I'm talking about? That's a really good question. If you remember back to video 1, I talked about where I was in 2009. I was broke, confused, burned out, humiliated, working out of a crummy 2-bedroom apartment with no air conditioning in the dead of summer. I hadn't made a penny in 6 months, and I was pretty sure that starting my own business was the worst mistake of my life. I needed to make $100 grand so that I could feed my family, pay my taxes, and survive to keep fighting. That seemed like an impossible number at the time, and I didn't understand online marketing at all, and I hated selling because my only exposure to selling was high-pressure sales. I always felt dirty doing it, like I was trying to corner somebody into buying from me. So instead of trying to sell stuff, I'd spent the last 6 months putting out free content and collecting a bunch of email addresses. Each week I'd put out this free video that was just packed full of actionable information, and at the end of the video, and this proves how little I understood, I just said, hey, if you like this video, then maybe you give me your email address and I'll just send it to you every week. I posted that video on one forum and on my YouTube page, and I had managed to collect several thousand email addresses, and I decided rather than try and sell them something, I'd just make them an offer. Now, those are really the same thing, but in my mind I thought, well, I'm just making them an offer. I'm not really trying to sell them anything. Now, to make that offer, I did something else that was new at the time. I recorded a video of me talking directly to my followers. Now, today everybody and their brother does video where they talk into the camera, but back then it really wasn't being done. And again, if you think it was some kind of fancy video like the one that you're seeing now, just take a look at this. Yeah, that's me, 11 years ago, sitting in that crummy 2-bedroom apartment, and as you can see, I'm in a t-shirt. I have no microphone except for the one that's coming out of the $300 camcorder, and I didn't even have the good sense to close the bathroom door before I started shooting. That one bothers me to this day. The video was way too long, I had no script, but I was hoping that my followers would see past all of that and that they'd buy from me anyway. The short story, that video sold more than $100,000 worth of my coaching program, and I realized that I had stumbled upon something amazing. But before I tell you what I did, I should probably give you a little bit of a disclaimer real quick. See, my results, they're not even close to typical. And most people who buy any kind of coaching or mentoring program get little to no value out of it, largely because they don't simply do the work. They don't implement what they've learned. It's kind of like the average person who buys a workout equipment or a gym membership doesn't lose the weight because they just don't show up. This stuff is really hard. I have no idea how to turn lead into gold, and I have never made millions from a coffee shop, nor in a cabana out of Bali. Success at anything takes work, so please don't consider my numbers to be a promise or a guarantee of profits. That sound good? Perfect. I love it. So, how'd I do it? Well, it turned out over those 6 months, I'd built so much goodwill with my followers that when I finally made them that offer, they were chomping at the bit to buy. I actually had emails from several people who were telling me that they'd just been sitting around waiting for me to make them an offer so that they could join my program. Frankly, I was shocked because without even knowing it, I had done the second step in building a strong personal brand. I had become likable. If you remember back to video 1, we discussed that the first step is getting known. But after they know who you are, they really have to like you, and eventually they need to trust you. But how do you do that? Well, there's actually a formula for getting people to like you, and it's pretty cool. The first thing that you have to do is you gotta be speaking to the right people. A lot of entrepreneurs spend time building out an avatar of the perfect prospect, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I'd like to give you a simpler way of doing it. You see, we all want one thing in life: increase. Increase in our wealth, in our health, in our happiness, in our relationships. We might want all of them at the same time, or we might just want one of them in one area of your life. So ask yourself, where is my ideal prospect struggling? That's step number one. Now let's say, for example, it's their health. Well, now you got to ask, well, are they too fat? Are they too skinny? Do they have cancer? Do they suffer from migraines? And once you got that figured out, well, then you got to figure out what it is that they really want and why they want it. The process is going to look something like this. Let's say my perfect prospect would be a guy in his 40s who used to be athletic, and now he's 30 pounds overweight. He's tired and suffering from self-esteem issues. He wants to lose weight, but more than anything, he wants his confidence back. He wants to be that athlete again. He wants to look and feel like he did in his 20s. You see, it's that emotional connection that we want to hone in on. The weight loss is the problem, but what he's really buying is a feeling. Remember, we all just want three things: certainty, significance, and love and connection. If you're not speaking to the emotion behind the problem, you're not going to build any kind of trust and likability, and certainly not the kind necessary to sell them. Now, once you have the right person and you've got their attention, it's time for you to make them like you. And it turns out that some boys over at the FBI have given us a great template for doing just this. What I'm going to show you now is called the relationship formula, and it has been used for years to get terrorists to confess and to turn spies into double agents. This is really powerful stuff. So let's talk about the relationship formula for a minute. Now, as I said before, this formula was developed by the FBI to do some pretty amazing things when it comes to flipping terrorists or getting spies to become double agents. Basically, taking people who really did not want to talk to the FBI and not only getting them to spill their guts, but in many cases getting them to turn and become assets for the Americans rather than for their enemies. Now, this formula comes from Jack Schafer, who is a PhD and a former FBI special agent and behavioral analyst who worked for the FBI's, obviously, behavioral analysis unit. And it looks like this. It's pretty simple. It says proximity plus frequency plus consistency and duration plus intensity equals the depth or the level of relationship with which we have with someone. So let's go one by one through those and talk about each of them. So first one's proximity. Pretty simple. The closer the space that you two occupy has a massive impact on your ability to build relationship and trust. If you are, for example, you're far more likely to have a close relationship with someone that you work in the same building with than a coworker who might live in another city, or even a friend who might live in another city. Now, how does this translate to, say, online, or what we would consider to be one-to-many types of conversations? Because naturally, you can't be in the same room or occupy the same space every day with the bulk of the people that you do business with. But I want you to think about it this way. If we think about the ways we communicate with people online, email is probably the furthest away, because we send them an email and they get thousands of them every week, and maybe they click through, maybe they read them, maybe they don't. So that's kind of the furthest away. If we move a little bit closer to them, it might be something like a direct message that we send them via Facebook, or it might be a post that we make that they follow and that they see in their feed that they really like. And if we do that, if we start to do that with some consistency, as I'll explain in a minute, we can start to really build some relationship there. Maybe the most intimate that you might get with your people in a one-to-many environment, and again, I'm talking about doing like mass communication, would be a text message. Because only people who we really know tend to get our phone numbers. We tend to only give that out to close friends and family members. So if on some off chance you manage to get a phone number from one of your potential clients and you choose to text them in some sort of group text, that's certainly going to be a closer proximity than, say, as I said, email. So start thinking through that. How can I create a more close relationship in terms of the proximity of how I communicate with the people I want to do business with or the people I'm already doing business with. Second one's frequency. So how often you see someone also increases the closeness of the relationship. So we tend to spend more time with people that we like, and we tend to distance ourselves from people that we don't like. And if you want to improve a friendship or build a relationship, the more time you spend with that person, the better. So people always ask me, well, how often should I be posting videos? Because they look at guys like Gary Vaynerchuk or they look at guys like Grant Cardone and they say, these guys are posting like 50 times a day and I'm just one guy out here trying to make things happen. How am I supposed to compete with those guys? And the fact is, in terms of the frequency of the relationship, you can't, because they're inundating people with them. It also doesn't mean that you have to do something every single day. What I'm going to suggest to you in terms of frequency is that you figure out what platform you really want to work on. So figure out where they are. Are your ideal clients on Instagram or are they on Facebook? Just choose. Is it one or the other? If it's Facebook, okay. Now let's ask, are more of them on LinkedIn than Facebook? And once you kind of narrow down where the most likely place is that you're going to find your ideal prospect, that's where I want you to devote like 90 to 100% of your time, depending on how much content you can create. And then I want you to be really frequent with that. So do it every other day. Do it once a day. Do it once a week, but at the same time every week, right? Start establishing some of these routines where people get used to seeing you at specific times and specific places so that they know that they have a friend there. And then as you create content over time, what tends to happen is when somebody comes into your sphere of influence and they start watching a few of your videos, they start reading a few of your blog posts, all of a sudden, now they go back and start watching all of your old stuff and they start doing some binge watching. One of the things that I keep hearing all day is, oh, you have to keep the videos short. People don't like that type of content anymore. This attention span's not there. The truth is, we have a virtually unlimited supply of attention for things that we care about. So when you say, how long should the video be? How long should the blog post be? It should be as long as it needs to be for you to get your message across and for you to create that connection with your audience, proximity and frequency. And then we also need consistency and duration. The regularity with which you engage with someone also matters a great deal. So seeing someone every day for a year is obviously better than seeing them sporadically over that same year. And likewise, the duration of the encounter has a huge impact. So new relationships are often frequent, consistent, and include long durations of time spent together. However, if your contact is frequent and consistent, it often does not require long durations in order to maintain it, whereas the opposite would require a longer duration to make the same relationship. So I want you to think for a moment like this. When you found that new woman or that new man in your life, think about how much time, how frequent, how consistent that relationship was. In fact, when you were first starting out for the first 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, it was probably really consistent. Because we want that attachment. We're building that relationship. We want to devote time to it because it's new and fresh and we're learning about people. Your audience, as they begin to find you, are going to want to do the same thing. And so you have to give them the ability to do that by being consistent and by giving them plenty of content to watch when they're ready. Okay? Now, what I was saying about duration is that if you have frequent and consistent contact with them, it often doesn't need to be really long. So after you start spending a little bit of time with the people that you love or the people that you have close relationships with, you can catch up on what's been happening in maybe 20 minutes because you see them all the time. It's frequent and consistent. Whereas if you don't have a frequent and consistent relationship, it might still be a really good one. It might be a close relationship, but it's going to take you a lot longer to catch up. That's like when you see an old friend who comes in from out of town and all you want to do is just sit down and the next thing you know, 3, 4, 5 hours go by and you're still catching up on everything that's been going on in your lives. So proximity, frequency, consistency and duration, and then finally, intensity. So the emotional connection that you have during your contact is important as well. A new romantic relationship, as I said, is frequent, it's consistent, it's definitely intense, and you often spend every spare moment together. If this intensity is not present, it often leads to problems and one or both parties feeling very unfulfilled. So, as I said before, what we're really after is that emotional connection. We're trying to not necessarily identify the problem, but identify the emotional pain that's associated with that problem. And oftentimes what we think is the real problem is not the real problem. I'll give you a great example of this. The first business that I started was in trading and investing. And a lot of people think that one of the major problems that people have is a fear of losing money. So they've been losing money a lot and they don't want to lose money anymore. And so they think there's a fear there. And that while that certainly is a fear, the number one fear that they have is being humiliated. See, by the time that they come to me, they had already bought a whole bunch of junk from other people. They tried all these signal services. They tried other training courses. They tried software, and none of it had worked. And they'd really just lost a lot of money. And so every time they would go through that process, they would end up leaving feeling like, oh, not only did I lose money, but now like my friends and family know that I lost money. My wife or my husband now is looking at me going like, you spent money on what again? And so there's this real humiliation there. And if you can't speak to that, if you can't talk to them about that, then there's very little chance that they're going to reinvest with you unless there's some kind of degenerate. And so when you start putting your communication packages together, when they finally have some awareness with you and they finally realize that you exist, you have to start creating that relationship by being close, frequent, consistent over long periods of time and making sure that that is emotionally intense by speaking directly to the emotional attachment and those emotional pain points that they're dealing with. When you use the relationship formula in combination with the emotional connection to your prospect's problem, you can rapidly build trust and likability. Now, before I end this session, I want to give you one more tool that you can use, and I think this is going to help you, especially if you do a lot of face-to-face selling or you do a lot of closing over the phone. We all tend to have what's called a social identity, and that identity is what defines us as a person. It might be father or husband or accountant or activist. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is making a connection. And if you're in a one-on-one situation, here are some things that you can do to figure out where you have a connection with that person. There are actually 4 of these, but for the sake of time, I'm going to give you one of them, and it's called affinity statements. So affinity statements are really nothing more than a way to quickly try and figure out how somebody identifies and what they find valuable and where you're going to find the most alignment with them. And as I said, this works really well if you are selling one-on-one, or even if you're just at a cocktail party. If you've ever had trouble talking to somebody and you can't figure out, you have a tough time holding a conversation, you don't really like chit-chat. I honestly happen to be that way. I use this formula all the time just to sort of create relationship and build a bond. And there's an acronym for it. It's called FORM, and it stands for Family, Occupation, Recreation, and Money. Now, this is typically the order that most people self-identify. So for example, primarily first and foremost, they would be a father or a husband or a wife or a mother, something along those lines. And so if you are trying to create a relationship with somebody, talk to them about that. Ask them, do they have any kids? Ask them if they're married. Start talking to them about that and see if they don't kind of give you something back. If they don't seem to be interested in that, well, okay, we're going to move on to the next one, occupation. And you'll say, well, so what do you do for a living? And he might say something like, oh, I'm an auto mechanic. And you say, oh, okay, well, that's great. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to find some alignment. So if you used to be an auto mechanic, or if you are also an auto mechanic, great. Likelihood of that being true is probably very slim. How about, do you know somebody who is an auto mechanic? Was it your grandpa or your uncle or your cousin? Do you know anybody? If so, then you're like, oh, you're a mechanic? Yeah, my cousin's a mechanic. Yeah. Where's your shop at? Stuff like that. Creating alignment, creating connection with them. At the very least, you can come up with something. You can say, well, oh yeah, I don't know. I'm always looking for a good mechanic. I love a good mechanic. Like, this is exciting. Just creating that connection and trying to deepen that bond. If they're not really interested in talking about their work, so they kind of glaze over that, then move on to recreation. Here we're going to talk about sports, leisure activities, golf, that kind of thing. What kind of shows, what kind of sports do they watch? What kind of recreational activities are they into? And just see if they don't maybe like talking about football or talking about hockey or golf or something like that. Last but not least is money, and in there we would include money, politics, investments, that kind of stuff. Some people, that's really what they want to talk about. They want to talk about politics. They want to talk about Trump, good or bad. They want to talk about investments and what they saw on CNBC. So, but this tends to be all the way at the bottom of the list because a lot of people, in fact, I would say most people, have an adversity to discussing money and things to do with money, especially with people that they don't know. So early on in that relationship building, money may be low on the totem pole, but as you get to know each other, they may open up, and that may really be the number one thing that they want to hear about. But this relationship formula and these affinity statements combined together really help you, whether you're doing one-to-many or one-to-one, relationship building, really helps you establish yourself and build that deeper bond. And a common mistake that influencers make, people who are trying to build strong brands, is spending too much time trying to teach and educate and not enough time building these kind of affinity bridges. Like your emotional bond, your personal connection with your followers will have far more to do with whether they buy from you than the information that you provide them. So the truth is there is no such thing as B2B or B2C. There's just person to person. And the deeper that emotional connection they have with you, the more likely they're going to buy from you. So there you have it. Over the last 2 videos, you've learned how to get someone's attention and how to quickly get them to like and trust you. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to make the perfect offer that not only makes your audience desperate for what you've got, but also builds goodwill at the same time. I'm super excited about it, so I'll see you soon.